Greetings all, this is Harry Nick. How are you guys going? The other week on the channel we started our How to Play X-Wing series, describing all of the rules in the game for you newer players out there. And just the other day I did a video on the rules of squad building. Now I wanted to make a follow-up video to that because while it's all well and good to understand the rules around what upgrades you can and can't take, what pilots and ships and all that kind of stuff, that doesn't really help us in terms of steering the way we should think about the way we build out our ships, because there's actually a lot of general theory that goes along with this. And again, I'm not just talking about rules, I'm talking about the psychology of why you should or shouldn't pick certain upgrades or pilots. This is a very interesting topic. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions on this. I am no exception to that. I like to talk about it. I have a YouTube channel that talks about X-Wing, so there you go. And I find it very interesting seeing how different sort of players think about this sort of thing. I want to actually refer to something that the head of design at Magic the Gathering, Mark Rosewater, talks about in his podcast called Drive to Work. By the way, guys, if any of you are into game design in general, I can strongly recommend it. Sorry if you don't play Magic, but it's just a great podcast that talks about game design in general, and that's talking about the different psychographics within the marketplace of people that play a certain game. This applies to Magic, this absolutely applies to X-Wing as well. Psychographic literally means psychological demographic, where you have certain people that think certain ways, certain people that want different things out of the game. And probably the two key polarizing differences that I'm going to refer to in this video are those people who are tournament grinders, tournament spikes as they're commonly referred to, and sort of the kitchen table X-Wing player who like to experiment with different lists, don't really care about things being too competitive and likes to keep things casual, often rejects meta building as a rule. I will just say before we dive into this, I don't think there's anything wrong with either of those mentalities. I don't think there's anything wrong with meta listing or net listing or just playing casual and making a point of never meta listing. Those are both fine approaches. There's nothing wrong with either of those two things. And I think in a lot of cases, people who fall into one of those categories would do well to come to a better understanding about how the other group thinks. But that's a whole other conversation that I won't get into here. But basically, it's interesting watching these different groups have a look at cards, evaluate how lists work. I always try to be a happy medium with the way I play X-Wing. I don't consider myself a real tournament grinder, but then again, I do evaluate things. I do think about their effectiveness in tournaments. I do look for consistency in cards like a tournament grinder would, but I think it is ultimately very important to be able to take a step back and actually appreciate the different mentalities and approaches. So this video is going to be on the key factors of the way that I evaluate cards. Now, I will just say this is very much my opinion. It's the way I think. There are plenty of other people who have their own opinions on how these things work. Even on FFG's site alone, there's lots of articles by various pro players that are definitely worth reading. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is not the be-all and end-all way of thinking of list building. It's just the way I think about it. And the more I sort of look at lists, look at the ones that you guys have submitted on the channel, look at the ones the pro players use, I find the way I classify them in my own mind to be very helpful in the way I analyze them. And basically I've boiled everything down in my own mind to 3 different reasonings as to why you would take certain upgrades or pilots. And those are to do with synergy, to do with capitalizing on the role of a ship in your squad, and overall general value. These are the 3 things I always look out for. And hopefully when you guys come to an understanding of these, you can see how all of these work in the list that you build and the list that you see flown by others. So let's talk about these. Let's first talk about synergy. And this is a concept that a lot of new players tend to latch onto. Indeed, I've seen a lot of commenters, a lot of YouTubers and that kind of thing, talking to new players as if synergy is the most important thing that you could be thinking about. And I actually strongly disagree with that stance overall. Synergy basically is when 2 or more pilot abilities or upgrades combo together to form something greater than the sum of their parts. It's basically you get a certain amount of value out of one upgrade, a certain amount of value out of another upgrade, but combined they give you a really powerful payoff that neither of those things could do by themselves. It's a very simple concept and we see this in a lot of lists. Let's take a look at example on the Scum faction at the Millennium Falcon title card. Now this, apart from other things, gives your ship a lot of different utilities, but the key thing which provides synergistic combos on this is the fact that you get an extra attack dice when your opponent is stressed. So as a synergistic choice in your list, you may take certain things that provide your opponent's ships with stress. Pretty straightforward. On the channel, we have a lot of submissions that combo this alongside 000. Quite a clear synergistic build you can see here. 000 can force your opponent to take stress or give you a calculate token. It's not uncommon to see this title on the Millennium Falcon flow alongside Asajj Ventress, for example. Asajj Ventress is also a simple way of forcing stress onto your opponent's ships. There is also synergy between different abilities that work together. For example, anything that works inside the Bullseye firing arc. You may have Corran Horn on the Rebellion in the E-Wing. Now his ability to get an extra shot during one turn happens inside the Bullseye firing arc. A common choice for him would be to give him some other benefit that happens inside the Bullseye firing arc, like equipping him with the card Predator or Marksmanship. This way, the player is further incentivized to do something they were already going to do anyway, and that provides a different kind of synergy. It's like a double payoff kind of situation. Also, in the case of Corran Horn, if he has any card that modifies his attack because he's attacking twice, he gets double the value out of that card during any one turn, which is very, very powerful. This kind of effect could also be used on Sunterfell. Both Predator and Marksmanship work well with him because he already wants to get his opponent's ship inside his Bullseye firing arc. Pretty simple concept. The thing about synergy is you get large payoffs for combining these cards together. Now the downside with synergy, and this is something that a lot of newer players I don't think really appreciate, is when you don't make the synergistic thing work, when you don't allow this combo to go off, so to speak, you are losing the value of both of those cards combined, so it actually swings back in the other direction. In the example of Lander's Millennium Falcon alongside 000 as an upgrade card on that same platform, if you don't get an enemy ship inside range 1 and your opponent does not put stress tokens on their ships for you, well guess what? You've just lost a lot of value across multiple cards. So it is very important when comboing cards together, you try and manufacture situations in your games that helps them go off, that helps get that extra bit of value out of them. You don't have to make them work all the time, but the key thing is to make sure those situations happen frequently enough to justify the synergy in the first place. Let's move on to the second point I was talking about, ship rolls. And this is very straightforward. Indeed, this relates probably more than anything else to the various types of upgrade cards. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of ship rolls in the game of X-Wing. I'm not going to go through each of them in detail, but essentially we have things like aces, alpha strikers, brawlers, controllers, blockers, all of those kinds of things. Plus, several ships can be 2 or more of those things at one time. It's very possible. For example, we could say a TIE Interceptor is absolutely a dedicated ace platform. In fact, out of all the ace platforms in the game, this is easily the most purest form of that. Where we take a look at something like an X-Wing, well, that can be an ace in the right circumstance. It can sort of be a brawler. It's very difficult to quantify the X-Wing. Whereas we have a look at something like a Hawk, that's definitely a dedicated controller. And when we look at the different upgrade types, you can definitely say, well, in general, talents work well on aces, turrets work well on controllers, cannons sort of work well on brawlers, but these aren't really hard and fast rules. You've really got to evaluate these on a case-by-case basis. But in the meta at the moment, we do have some clear examples of upgrade cards that really do lean into this idea. We're seeing quite a lot, for example, of Darth Vader with supernatural reflexes. And this is rather interesting because honestly, based on my own previous evaluation of this, I honestly thought before these came out that this wouldn't be a very strong combo. And it turns out I was pretty wrong. In fact, the reason that I wasn't so convinced about this is because Darth Vader does not have the boost action on his action bar. Plus, he is already capable of spending force tokens to get actions. So another card that spends force tokens to get actions, even though the timing's a bit different, I wasn't convinced the value was there. But it simply is. And this really does lean into Vader's role of being a pure ace. Supernatural Reflexes allows Vader to do a boost or barrel roll before he moves, and quite poignantly prevents your opponent from blocking him, which has proven very, very powerful. Supernatural Reflexes is definitely a card that you would favour on aces. Alternatively, things like Ordnance you'd often favour on Alpha Strikes. Another thing that's proving powerful in the meta right now is Redline in the TIE Punisher. He often wants to take proton torpedoes because he's a very capable Alpha Striker. Making sure you can get a lot of damage on the table early is quite important for this platform to achieve. If we move on to the more brawlers, or we have a look at a dedicated knife fighter, which is basically a close range brawler like the B-Wing. X-Wing. It is capable of taking a very serious look at the card elusive. Being able to do those red Talon rolls, keeping in close and getting shots in your opponent's turn after turn is great, but you don't get tokens if you keep doing red maneuvers. However, with elusive, you do unlock a bit more potential in your green dice, meaning despite the fact that the B-Wing doesn't get many tokens, it can still defend itself just a little bit better. Again, this helps the B-Wing lean into its ship role. But that's not to say that the B-Wing never wants to take ordnance just because it's not an Alpha Striker. Indeed, on the X-Wing as well, with Luke Skywalker and Wedge Antilles, we are seeing builds that use proton torpedoes, not infrequently. And this takes me on to my third concept, the idea of general value. And this is where you use cards that are able to fire on all cylinders, despite the fact they're not particularly synergistic, or they don't really help a ship out with its role. But despite both of those factors, they are able to give you a lot of value over the course of a game. Indeed, a lot of these cards may be the kind of thing which can help a platform survive in different circumstances. For example, the proton torpedo on the X-Wing is a great option if it has to fight at range 3. Not something the X-Wing always loves to do, particularly against aces like Vader or Sunterfell. It's probably not going to fare too great against these. These guys get great defensive tokens, they get more green dice, but if they're fighting with proton torpedoes, they do have the option to fire those at them and give themselves a bit more flexibility. In general, the X-Wing already has 3 red dice, it has Talon rolls, it's stuff, it can brawl quite effectively, but the proton torpedoes just gives it a little bit of extra reach and helps it survive different circumstances. Now, above all else, when you're looking at cards that you take for pure value, these are things that must trigger consistently. In fact, when we're talking about cards that help with synergy and ship rolls, they can almost justifiably rarely trigger. But when we're talking about value cards, that's not the case. If you're taking a card which isn't particularly synergistic on a ship, it's the kind of card that needs to give you a lot of value over the course of a game. Hence, I use the term value for these cards. So hopefully now with these ideas, you can have a look at your own list and think about the way these apply. But just as an example, let's have a look at a major tournament that was played a couple of weeks ago in the Coruscant Invitational with Darth Vader, Sunterfell and Redline. Now, I've already analysed this in a previous video, but to talk about what I've been talking about in this video, let's have a look and think about the different ways these cards applies to what I was talking about. Now, before anything else, let's not consider Ruthless on Sunterfell, because it doesn't really apply to the things I've been talking about. It's not highly synergistic, it really does not help an ace in its ship role. Sure, it might work occasionally, but something that requires a lot of setup and is purely offensive does not talk to the adaptive nature of an ace. So really, if anything, this would fall into the realm of a value card. The problem is Ruthless needs a lot of setup to work. It's really designed more for something that can hit harder. Alpha Strikers, for example, can get a lot of value out of Ruthless, and it really plays into the role of those ships. But remember, Ruthless was a required card for every Imperial list in the Coruscant Invitational. And in any case, it was a free upgrade in this list, so it's not like the player is losing anything from taking it. But just taking a look at this Redline build, for example, all 3 of these upgrade cards very clearly play into the role of this ship. You have bombs, you have proton torpedoes, and you have a trajectory simulator. Now, Alpha Strikers are really powerful zoners. You can force your opponent to fly in certain ways they didn't want to previously do, by basically putting them on a certain part of the board and saying, okay, if you fly into this firing arc, I'm going to bring you a world of hurt, and you can force aces to try and dodge that and all that kind of stuff. And both proton torpedoes and proton bombs really do play into that. Trajectory Simulator is a card that really helps this role as well, because it can alter the placement of those bombs and just further empowers them. Whereas we take a look at Darth Vader with supernatural reflexes, I've already mentioned that is purely an ace-driven card. Fire control systems on any TIE Advanced pilot is a highly synergistic choice because of the way it works with Advanced Targeting Computer. Remember what I was talking about, anything in the bullseye firing arc on Sunterfell? Same thing here. You want to be taking target locks on Darth Vader because of the Advanced Targeting Computer. It can change your hit results to crit results. And in the same circumstances, Fire Control Systems gives you a reroll. So this is what we would call a synergistic choice. Let's have a look at the runner-up from the same tournament with Redline again, Major Vermeil and Whisper. Now, I won't spend too much time on Redline, we've already spoken about essentially what is this same package. This build also adds seismic charges and ablative plating. Again, we've just further empowered that bombing, which further pushes the role of that ship. Let's have a look at this Major Vermeil build, for example. While you perform an attack, if the defender does not have any green tokens, you may change one of your blank eyeball results to a hit result. That is a highly synergistic choice with Darth Vader, because Darth Vader forces an opponent's ship inside your firing arc to either take a damage or remove one of their tokens. If they remove one of their tokens, it further increases the odds of Major Vermeil getting value out of his ability. Additionally, we also have another interesting choice in 000. On the face of it, 000 may appear like a generic value card here. Not really the case actually, I would consider this more a synergistic choice. 000 wants you to be in range 0 to 1 of an enemy ship. So does the fact that the TIE Ripper already wants to be in range 0 to 1 because it has the jam action. Major Vermeil definitely wants to jam because that further empowers his ability and the ability on the Darth Vader crew card. 000 also gives you a bit more value because if you're using this very offensive tactic that Vader offers, you can force your opponent to either take a stress, which reduces the likelihood of them getting tokens to then the next turn be able to answer Darth Vader or Major Vermeil, or give you a calculate token, which further enables you to be more offensive. And there's also the added bonus that if you're flying into range 1, you're probably going to have to defend a fair heap, so getting defensive tokens also has a lot of value. It's a highly synergistic choice when you take into account all the different factors within this build. Plus, Ruthless does give you a bit more synergy in this build because you're flying this alongside Redline. Major Vermeil already wants to fly aggressively because of this build, so he can get a bit more value out of Ruthless than most other platforms may be able to take. But again, I do have to point out this was a required upgrade and was free in this build. Whisper has 2 upgrades in Duke and Collision Detector. Duke is absolutely a synergistic choice because of the way it works with the TIE Phantom baked in ability. After you decloak, you may perform an evade action. At the start of the end phase, you may spend 1 evade token to gain 1 cloak token. Duke is fantastic alongside this because Duke gives you an offensive boost off your evade tokens, plus it doesn't give you any incentive to spend the evade token, but the Stygium array does because then you can recloak. In fact, I think this is so synergistic that the TIE Phantom is pretty much going to want to look at this for a long time to come. Also, Collision Detector. This is an example of a value card. I mean, sure, you could make the argument that yes, because we're decloaking, we get a lot more potential use out of Collision Detector, but all in all, this is the kind of thing that works into the playstyle of the player using it, and you can derive a lot more value out of it based on the way you play. It can set up some really nasty situations if you decloak over a rock and surprise your opponent. Very potent card, and it does go to show that you don't really have to rely too much on synergy when building out your ships. But all in all, guys, just remember you don't have to do exactly what the pros do. The most important thing that you do when squad building is be self-critical. Always take the time to reflect and discuss on the different choices you've made in your squad building. Are they synergistic? Do they help with your ship roll? Are they giving you enough value? And don't ever be afraid to change your mind and let go of certain attachments you might have with certain upgrades because you like the way they play. Anyway, guys, I hope this video was of some help. You can help me by liking and subscribing, liking me on Facebook, following me on Twitter and Reddit. You can consider supporting my Patreon. Thank you so much for all my patrons who have supported me so far. I will catch you guys in the next video.